In this video, we're going to be talking about the placement of a planet in a house and what that indicates by showing how whether that gives us greater ease or difficulty, and then also looking at the nature of the houses as a person, place, thing, or part of our personality, and how that gets influenced by the planets being there. And then also how that's tying together the different areas and facets of our lives. All right, thank you once again taking time watching my little video. You've got a busy day, you've got family, you've got career, you've got home life, and you know what? You're watching my video. I truly, humbly appreciate that. And I would ask that if you like the material that you see, that you subscribe to my YouTube channel, that you give it a thumbs up if you like it. If you don't like it, feel free, give it a thumbs down, and it's probably about as far as you're going to get. That's fine. I understand. It's not for everybody. Anyhow, so in this video, we're going to be talking about planetary placement in houses. So the first thing to understand here is that the houses are overlaid on top of the Rashis depending upon where the first house falls, and then counting each Rashi. So wherever that ascendant, that Lagna, that rising sign is, that becomes the first house, second house, third house, fourth house, fifth house, sixth house, seventh house, etc., etc. So first and foremost, we need to know where the Rashis are. You need to know about Rashis before you can even think about talking about this idea of the houses and the planets going through each house. You have to know what the Rashis are because the houses overlay on top of the Rashis. So first, before even looking at what planet is placed in what house, the first thing to understand, and I made a video about this before, which is about planets and Rashis. Okay, so I'm just going to summarize basically what a planet and a Rashi is. The Rashi is like that environment, that unconscious energy. Planets are the conscious energy. So how does that planet perform by being in that environment? And based upon that planet's nature, based upon that sign's nature, and based upon the ruler of that sign, gives us an idea of how well that planet can perform by just being in that sign. And that can give us an idea based upon the planet's relationship to the ruler if it's in a difficult environment. Then we start looking at the houses. So for example, once we start, let's look at like a Gemini ascendant. So let's place the ascendant in Gemini. So now we can start looking at each of the houses. And you'll see here with Gemini, it's the first, Cancer the second, etc., all the way around until we get to Taurus, which would be the 12th house. So, so that's the first thing. So now we're seeing where to find the houses. And so the houses, it's very important that the houses, along with the Rashis, the first thing I'm going to talk about with the houses here is I'm going to talk about how the houses can show greater ease or greater ability to take action with that, or maybe more difficulties that are that are shown by a planet falling in a house. Now, this sounds very similar to dignity, planetary dignity, and planetary avashtas, which is about a planet being placed in a Rashi. And so with a planet in dignity, so we're going to modify these two things together, and this is something we'll get into later. So let's say we have a planet that is in a lower dignity in a house that shows greater ease. What we show is like that person with that aspect of the consciousness of that individualized aspect of our consciousness that planet represents is just by nature, by the environment it's put in, is going to be in a more difficult place, but if it's in, an angle or a trine, which we're going to get into in a second what those are, that'll show that we'll get into these more difficult situations, but it'll be something that we're always known to do, or we find greater ease actually with those difficult situations. And we can see that working vice versa with a planet in good dignity in a difficult house. Then we are working well where we always have struggles, but we always overcome those struggles. That's a planet in good dignity in a difficult house. So anyhow, so let's get right into it. Let's talk about the first type of houses, which is the angles, which are the first, the fourth, the seventh, and the 10th houses. So basically any planets that are placed in the first, the fourth, the seventh, and the 10th are going to be planets that we use more in our life. This energy is going to be something that we use more of. It's not necessarily like we're going to be more active with it. So there will be a somewhat of a sense of ease, but just a sense of being more active with that planet. And why is that? Well, let's look at because right here, this is called the South Indian style chart, where the Rashis are always in the same place, and the houses always move depending on where the ascendant falls. And then we have the North Indian chart, which is this right here, which this is where the houses always are. And what it does is it places an importance and a prominence. You'll see here the first, the fourth, the seventh, and the 10th are bigger boxes. Because if you really think about it, once we get into descriptions of what these houses are, and I'll give you a quick summation of what the first, the fourth, and the seventh, and the 10th are, and why planets placed here will typically work more with that planet, and you'll see it in that area of life. Like, these are the big four areas of life. The first house represents us, who we are, our body, our personality, everything about the self. The fourth house represents home, being comfortable with who we are, and happiness, luxury. Seventh house represents partners, and basically it's like the desires of the things that we want to bring into our life, those other things that we're working with. And then the 10th house represents like our status. It represents our career, which first house also kind of represents career. But anyhow, 10th house is like the activities that we take in the world, how we're viewed in the world. If you look at those, the first, the fourth, the seventh, and the 10th, we take more actions with these angular houses, with planets placed in these angular houses, because these are the most important parts of our life. Who we are, how secure we are with ourselves, our home, our happiness. If you think about it, what are the four most important things in life, right? It would be health, it would be home, it would be partnership, spouse, and then 10th house, career. When are those not the most important? So planets placed in those we take more action on, because those are the four most fundamental areas of life. So anyhow, those are the angular houses, known as the angles. These are also called the kendras. And then there are the trines, which are known as the konas. Now, these are the first, the fifth, and the 9th house. These are, so planets placed in the first, fifth, and 9th are typically planets that are going to operate with greater ease in our life. Whatever those planets indicate, and especially the houses that those planets rule, will be areas that just naturally happen smoother and easier within our life. So the trines represent ease of things working out. And you'll see that the first house is an angle and a trine. That's because it's who we are. So it's naturally planets placed in the first house. It's just naturally it's ease, and it's acting because it's dealing with that planet, that individualized sense of consciousness. That particular part of consciousness is one that is just more intrinsic to who we are. So that's how we can look at the trines and planets placed in the trines. And it's also important to understand too, if you're looking at planetary periods, planetary dashas. So anytime you're running, so if you have a planet in the first, the fifth, or the 9th, and you're running that planet's dasha, that's typically going to be a dasha all other factors equal, typically going to be a dasha for that planet that will operate smoother in life. Things will just tend to work out more harmoniously and with less work. All other factors equal. And then we come into what are known as the Trik houses, T-R-I-K, the Trik houses. These are the 3rd, the 6th, and the 11th. And there's a reason why I'm talking about these after the trines, is because these, especially the 11th and the 3rd, these are the houses that are opposite, 7 houses away from, for example, the 11th house is 7 houses away from the 5th. The 3rd house is 7 houses away from the 9th. So it's the opposite of ease. And if you think about what the 11th, so real quick, what the 3rd house kind of represents are things that we're interested in, right? 9th house is kind of like our purpose in life, like our dharma, our calling, you know, and kind of like seeing the bigger picture, right? Whereas the 3rd house is like about what we're interested in. Oh yeah, I think that's neat. And so that these are a little bit of difficult houses because they're pulling us away from like our dharma of life, our natural ability in life. So planets placed in the 3rd, 6th, and 11th are typically planets where we're going to find ourselves having to do more things with, basically. So a planet placed in the 3rd, it's like you're having to manipulate more details, or you're having to learn more things. You're having to deal with, maybe you get more involved with hobbies and it kind of takes you away from this. And then the planets in the 6th house represents like our mundane life and the things that we have to deal with on an everyday level. And it also represents debts and delays and obstacles. So those are the kind of things that pull us away from our path, that make things more difficult. So a planet placed in the 6th is typically going to be one where we're having to put more work into, more effort and more energy, because there's things that maybe are, it just requires more constant maintenance. And then planets in the 11th is all about peer groups. It's about promotion. It's about desires. It's about where we want to be in life. So when we have planets in the 11th house, those are planets that we typically, to make that planet work right, there's more things. We start thinking about the bigger picture. We're looking at the things that we have to do. We're looking at, we might be looking for validation from other people as to, is this the best thing to do? Well, let me seek out my peers. Let me seek out my other people. And so that's how we can kind of look at the Trik houses, is they require more work, more effort, more energy. There's more long-term planning involved when the 11th house. So for these things to work, we have to think about all the things that we want to do and the great bigger picture of how we're going to get there. And so it's just a little bit more energy. It's not necessarily difficult, but it kind of pulls us away from just living the ease and nature of our dharma. Then we come into the Upachya houses, or the Upachaya houses, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And these are the houses of growth, the houses of increase. You will notice that the Trik houses are the same as the Upachya houses, just with the addition of the 10th house. Because these things that we get involved with when we're having to do more planning, when we're having to utilize and more of our skills, when we're having to do more everyday maintenance on it. And then the 10th represents just having that planet be part of our obligations, responsibilities, and duties of the actions that we're taking in the world. So by these planetary placements are houses of growth and increase, because we're working more with these planets. And so naturally, planets that are placed in the Upachaya houses, or the Upachya houses, depending on your pronunciation, these are typically planets that at first in our life we have to work more with and are a sense of a little bit of difficulty. But then as the time wears on in our life, these are planets that by working with them and by engaging in the practice of these houses, we get more out of it. The 11th is the highest of the Upachyas, followed closely by the 10th, and then probably the 3rd, and then probably the 6th. So anyhow, and then we have the Dushtanas. You might have heard of these. These are known as the difficult houses. You will see again the sixth house here, which is also a trig house, which is also a Nupacha house, is a Dushtana. So the Dushtanas are the difficult houses, the houses that just require more work. Again, with the sixth house here, the sixth house, since it needs more maintenance, planets placed in the sixth are typically planets during their period of time, or during that, or just to use that aspect of our life, or whatever the houses that those planets rule that are placed in the sixth require more of an everyday grind. They require more maintenance, more work. They incur more debts and delays and more obstacles to being able to use those planets. But again, being that it's a Nupacha house and being that it is a trig house, it's stuff that we're getting involved with and we're working with more and more, and we can actually make it be greater. Then we come over to the eighth house, planets that are placed in the eighth house. The eighth house is the sign of transformation. But what happens though is it's transformation that is unseen. It takes us in different directions. It's a house of extreme ups and downs. It's a house of just all of a sudden we think we're going one way and then our life just changes course. That's what you get with a planet in the eighth house. Any planet in the eighth house is going to have a bunch of ups and downs. It's going to take twists and turns that were unexpected. And then sometimes it even means that part or aspect of our life has to undergo a transformation. And that transformation may be what could be called death. But maybe it's just death of one thing so that something new can sprout up. So this is why it's a difficult thing, because it's not what you're planning on. And then there's the 12th house. This is a Dushtana because the 12th house is about our expenses. So planets in the 12th house, we typically, to be able to use them, we're gonna incur more loss. It's gonna be more expense. An expense can be a literal thing like money, but expense can just be our time and our energy as well. So planets in the 12th are just to be able to fulfill that planet's agenda of whatever it's looking to bring into our life are going to be planets that bring us, that we're just going to have, no matter what we do, whatever we put into it, we never quite feel like we're getting out of it. You know, we're not getting an equal amount out. It's like we're putting more in and getting less in return. And that's kind of the definition of the expense, or at least the nature of expense when it comes to planets placed in the 12th house. So now we have the 12 houses, and I think it would be good to see kind of how there's an overlap for some of these. So for the first house we see is a trine and an angle. The third house is a trig and a Nupacha house. The fourth house is an angle. So you can see right now planets placed in the first are going to be planets we just naturally operate better with. Planets placed in the third we're going to work more with, but we will get an increase over time. Planets placed in the fourth are going to, well, let's just do this. Planets placed in the fourth and the seventh are going to be planets that we're just naturally going to be a bigger part of our life, and we'll just be more active with those. And then a planet placed in the fifth and the ninth, these are going to be planets that are, we just experience greater ease with the agenda of these planets. Planets placed in the sixth can be a little bit difficult. We're going to have to work more with these planets, but it is going to be a source of growth, because as long as we maintain and we work with the planets placed in the sixth house and we deal with the difficulties indicated by being a Dushtana, we will get in a source of increase, but it's going to be kind of harder because we're going to have to work with it constantly. And then the 8th and the 12th house, these are just houses of more difficulties based upon the nature of the 8th and the 12th, like I explained earlier. And in the 10th house is an angle and an Upacha house. Not only do we work with these things naturally in our life with the 10th house, but it's also, we work with them and it's a sense of increase. These things get greater. It becomes a greater part of our life and our personality, and those planets that are placed there are typically going to show how we're viewed in life, because the 10th house is the house of status. It's the house of the engaging in the activities of our life and how we're taking activity in our karma in life, which is another word for activity, so it's kind of redundant. But anyhow, and then we have the 11th house, which is a Treek and a Nupacha house. So again, it's the 3rd and the 11th are very similar in that aspect. So now, the other thing that a house represents, I like to say a house represents nouns. A noun is a person, a place, or a thing. But I would also say that each house, not only is it a noun, but it is also an aspect of our personality as well. So the first house deals, so planets placed in the first house are going to be, so it's like our body, our self, our personality. And so it's going to have a lot to do with who we are. That planets placed in the first are going to give more of an indication of what makes us what, and how we go about our path in life. Now, the second house, and then what's important to understand also, I should say about these nouns, is you will see each house is going to represent a certain type of person of our life. It's going to indicate a certain other nouns, which those nouns might be real concrete things, or those nouns might be aspects of our life that we're dealing with. And so an example of that, whereas the second house now, planets placed in the second house are going to have an influence on these areas of our life that has to do with our families, our resources, and our wealth and our possessions. So if you have a planet placed in the second house, it's going to color these aspects of your life. And then we will see that, and then it's also, each one of these houses also kind of indicates a certain part of our concrete experience and or our personality. So if the second house is about resources and wealth, then it's also about our resourcefulness, our ability to get wealth. The way that we get these things is going to be colored by the planets that are placed in these houses. And so then we see with the first house, it's about, or sorry, the second house is about family, which are I always call the second house, it's like our liquid wealth, our liquid resources, and our liquid family. It means it's the changing environment of our house. So family, as indicated by the second house, is also the friends. It's like the people that you live with that provide value for you in return. Like there's kind of a cycle going on there. They provide value to you and you receive value from them. And it's constantly changing throughout your life. When you're first born, your family is that. It's your immediate family, your mom, your dad, and your siblings, right? Whereas later in life, it becomes your wife and your children, or whoever's living under the same roof as you, that when you go out to work to provide wealth and to gain resources, it's who you would be associating with. And so planets placed in the second are going to color this aspect of your life. You're going to see if you have Sun in the second house, then possibly what that means is that there is like maybe these people are more bright and shiny. Maybe there's more of an authoritative presence of your family. You combine the qualities of the Sun with that, influencing that to the house. And then we come over here to the third house, which is like siblings. The people, and siblings can also mean, like the way it's described in Parashara is co-borns. So it's like the people that are born with you, right? Which can be your siblings, but it can also be your co-workers, the people that you're born with in your career. It can be your teammates, the people that are born with you onto your team. So it's just like people that you're working with towards kind of a constant goal, because third house deals with our strengths and our skills and our hobbies. So planets in the third house may indicate the types of hobbies that we have and the types of, and maybe it can indicate the nature of how our siblings are. And then the nature of how we go about our strengths. So you can just keep going and going about each house here and how planets together. I just wanted to give a couple of examples just to start with. And then, so it's now what we're looking at is planets as things, as houses as the concrete things in our life. Well, when we looked at that picture of the zodiac, of the chart, when we're looking at the chart, what we're going to see is that each planet rules a sign, so each planet rules a house. So for example, we were talking about the second and third house, and we were talking about a Gemini ascendant earlier in this video, which with a Gemini ascendant, that places the sun as the third lord, and it places the moon as the second lord. So let's just real quick, let's say that in this chart, you have the sun in Cancer and the moon in Leo. What you get there is not only do you have the sun, like I talked about the sun being representative of like the family, right? So it's going to show that the family is more prominent and important part of their life because the sun is placed there in that second house, and gaining their resources and wealth is more prominent and important to them. But then we also see that the sun is the third lord. So what that shows is the way this person is going to utilize their resources and to gain their wealth. We're going to see that third house things are interwoven. So that sun is also going to have an idea of this, using this person's strengths and hobbies and skills and their ability to learn new things is going to be about how they go about gaining their wealth. And then another thing not shown here is that the second house represents speech and the third house represents communication, right? So maybe this is and here you would have the third lord ruling the third bhava, which represents communication, getting involved with the family. So this is a person that's more vocally speaking purely about the big goals that they want to achieve with their family. Why is it speaking regally and speaking about their goals? Because that's what the sun represents, the big things, the big communication, and bringing that, and that's how we start tying these things together. So now what you're seeing is a planet placed in a sign is also bringing its rulership of the house that it represents into where it's going. So similarly, what we would see here is we would have speech ruled by the second house going into the moon, with the moon being the ruler of the second house being placed in the third. Now we're going to take all of this that we see that the second house represents, and it's going to be going into that third house. In this particular example, I'm showing you an interchange. So with this, whenever you see an interchange, it's like, whoa, this energy is really tied together. So now we're seeing how the speech, and the moon represents sweet speech, is how they're going to communicate, because the third house is communication. And this just gives further confirmation in this example of how communication and family and resources all come together. So with the moon in the third house, this really shows the moon represents our adaptability. Cancer, the moon sign, represents adaptability. So this shows that also that with this person's siblings might have more lunar qualities. This person's siblings might have the quality of being more lunar, more caring and compassionate and willing to listen to you. But also what this would show is, because the second lord's involved, this would give more qualities of the second lord to the siblings. Maybe the siblings are people who are more responsible as well and more resourceful, and now also willing to listen. And so that's how we start looking at planetary placements, is you always want to take the planet as what it is, and then you want to see the agenda, which is the house that it's ruling, right? So sun coming into the second house, we'll see that there's going to be an influence of second house things by the sun being placed there. And then we can see that sun is going to be ruling the third house. So it's going to be bringing those, it's going to be marrying those two things together. The third house qualities are being brought into that second house quality. And then you can go back to the planet placed in the Rashi, and we would see that both of these planets by planetary dignity would be in natural friend signs and in great friend dignity. So we would know that that moon placed in the third house, this would mean that this person will have to work more with this energy. They're going to have to learn new things to be able to get their resources, which is second house agenda of the moon. But since it's in a higher dignity in a natural friend sign, it's going to feel better about that. It's going to more naturally be able to utilize this energy. So that's how we also, so once you start understanding how the agendas intertwine, whether the planet is in an area of life that is either requiring more work or maybe with greater ease, then does it do it well? Or does it feel like it's an environment that it is placed in that it's going to struggle more? And that's what planets and Rashis help us understand. So we really have to start tying all these things together. And this is why I've been hesitating to make a video about planets and houses, because it's a lot of things to take into consideration at one time. So anyhow, this has been a very long video for a reason, because it's a lot of information to take in. And I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you like what you see, please subscribe to my channel. And thank you for watching. And namaste.